Okay. So yes, welcome to this is the fourth part of our Mahabharata class. So today I'm going to talk about where we left off. Yesterday we talked about Yayati, King Bharat, and King Kuru. So, and we got all the way up to just mentioning King Shantanu. So King Shantanu was the king of the Bharat dynasty. And one of the reasons his name is Shantanu is Shantanu means one who brings peace. And so Shantanu had this, what in later ages they used to call the king's touch. If anybody felt any kind of discomfort, then he would touch them and they would feel better. They would feel at peace. So that's why his name was Shantanu, because he could touch people and they would feel at peace. So his name was Shantanu. So Shantanu was a very powerful king, a very righteous king, king of the Bharat dynasty. It was a very powerful dynasty at this point. And so Shantanu was, riding out on his chariot, and the king would go hunting back in those days. So he came up, he was riding around his chariot, kind of surveying the land, seeing what was going on. And he came to the Ganga, the Ganges River, and he saw a beautiful woman. So he was immediately attracted to her. So Kshatriyas being Kshatriyas, and they don't really beat around the bush when it comes to things, Shantanu immediately approached her and said, my dear fair goddess, are you married? And she said, no. He said, fine, oh, that's wonderful. Would you want to marry me? And she said, I will marry you, but if you question anything I do, or say any kind of contradictory statement to me, then I will leave. So that was her stipulation. So Shantanu agreed to this statement and brought her back to the palace, and that day itself, they were immediately married. And sometime afterwards, she was pregnant and gave birth to a boy. And everyone was happy. And now, in Vedic culture, you don't bring the baby, you're not supposed to leave the house with the baby until they're a certain age. It's considered inauspicious. But with Ganga, as soon as she was able, she took the baby and started walking out. And the king was surprised by this, so he followed her. And he was following her, and she was carrying the baby, and she walked to the river Ganga, and she immediately just threw it in the river. And the baby sunk to the bottom and drowned. And so Shantanu was shocked. And he was like, he's like speechless. And he's about to say something, but then he remembered what her stipulation was. That if he ever questioned her, she would leave. So Shantanu didn't say anything, but this was very difficult for him, and also very difficult in general, because you see, the king has a reputation. The king is supposed to protect all the members of society. And here he is his own child he can't protect. The mother, just because she's some beautiful girl, he can't say anything. She has some, I'll leave you if you question me. There's very, very deep and powerful messages with this story. In particular, one shouldn't put pleasure before duty. And another thing is, relationships is a two-way thing, but if you're under that much domination from your spouse that you can't even question some insane thing that they do, it's a very bad situation. And another thing, in this particular case, if we look, there's a lot of deep stuff going on as far as, in this, there's a lot of Leela involved and other things, but these Leelas also teach us, important lessons. Shantanu was completely lost all sense. And so it's causing complete destruction of his life. When you're, like I said, relationships a two-way street. In this particular case, it's not two-way street at all. It's his wife has complete control of the situation, and any whim she does, he cannot even question. It's a kind of hard thing to agree to. So she can do the craziest thing. It's a natural state that sometimes the feminine energy can be a little wild. And that's kind of the example given here. And the masculine energy is supposed to be stable to interact with the feminine energy, so that the feminine energy can maintain a little bit of its wildness, but be in a safe environment. It's a very deep kind of a thing, that's going on. But in this particular case, it's totally out of whack. Shantanu has no stability, and she has no stability either. So it's just constant destruction. So she gets on having kids, one after another. First baby is thrown in the water. Second baby, third baby, fourth baby, fifth baby, sixth baby, seventh baby. She had 7 kids and threw them in the water. So for 7 years, and the king needs an heir, right? So it's very important that the king has a son in particular to pass on his lineage, But so it's a very bad situation. So finally, everyone's questioning, who is this woman? Is she a, serial killer? Is she crazy? Why is she throwing these babies in the water? And finally, Shantanu, I suppose enough is too much, right? So the 8th baby, it's the same thing. He goes out to throw it in the water and he says, "What are you doing? You crazy woman, why are you throwing babies in the water? Stop." So then Ganga explained that so there's these babies were the Vasus, which is a classification of deities. They're like a kind of classification of Deva. And they had a leader named Yu. And in order to what's the word? His wife requested this sacred cow, that wish-fulfilling cow. So Dew arranged it so all of the Vasus would steal this cow and bring it home. And so because of that, Vishwamitra, who was the sage that had the sacred cow, it's like a common Danu cow, they call it. Jamadagni had one, Vashishta has one. So a few of the sages have these cows. So they stole the cow from Vashishta. So Vashishta cursed them and they would have to take birth as humans, which for a Deva is a very painful experience. So they went to Ganga and asked her if she would marry Shantanu and have them as her children. And then so she could immediately throw them in the water. And so they didn't have to live human lives. But the leader, it was prophesied that he would live a long time on the earth. So therefore, by fate, it was that Shantanu said, wait, stop. So the will of the gods came through and the Leela what happened as it should have. And so she said, I'm going to take the boy, and his name was Devarat at that time. And I'm going to give him an education in the heavenly worlds. So she took Devarat with her into the water. And so Shantanu was there, and he maintained being king for some time. And after a number of years passed, and the whole time, Shantanu, he missed Ganga, by the way. He was very infatuated with her. And so he came back to the river, very often, hoping that she would see him, or he would see her, basically. So after a number of years he came to the river, and the river was dry. And he was very, alarmed. So he rowed up the river to try and find the source of why the river had stopped. And he saw a youth who was shooting arrows into the river. And because of how fast and dense they made a dam in the river Ganga, which is a very big river. I mean, there's portions of it which are not that wide, but it's very fast and strong there. But if you go to where Hastinapur is supposed to be, it's at least half a mile across. So it's quite a big river. I love Ganga. When I was in India, I went to Mayapur for a period of time. And I would go swimming in Ganga every day. I couldn't, as soon as I saw it, I was magnetically drawn to it. I couldn't get enough of it. It's an amazing experience. I just was fully clothed. I was under a spell. And I just, as soon as I saw the Ganga, I just walked to it. Wearing a dhoti and a kurta and everything, very nice. And I just started swimming, and I just got in the water, and I got about halfway across before sanity finally came down to me. And I was like, wait, I'm swimming in the Ganga in a dhoti and a kurta, and I was just possessed. It was I was like, oh man, it's very deep, and there's a current here, so I should head back. But I was just yeah, Ganga is something else. So anyway, Shantanu, he was, so Bhisma was, Devavrata was making the dam in the river, which is such a big river, it's quite a feat. I can only imagine. So then when Devavrata saw Shantanu, he disappeared. And then, the river pushed away the dam, and then Ganga came out of the river with the boy, And she said, this is your son. He's been trained by Parshuram and Brihaspati and all these different personalities. So now he can stay with you. So Devavrata and Shantanu kind of lived together, and Devavrata was so happy. He had one son. Shantanu was so happy to have Devavrata because even though it's just one child, he's worth like 10,000. He's half God and he has all these powers and, taught by the celestials, and he's like a superhero. So he's very happy to have him. But one time after going into the on his little adventures that Shantanu would do, he came back and he was very depressed. And so Devavrata was very concerned. So he went to his father and said, what's the matter? And then Shantanu was very cryptic. And he said, just know that I love you as my son. And then he kind of like walked away, and Devavrata was very curious. So he went to the chariot driver. He said, what happened when you went out? So the chariot driver said, well, we were going out and we smelled this amazing scent, like roses, like mogra. Mogra is a particular kind of jasmine that if you smell it, then you know it. It's amazing kind of jasmine that has like this amazing smell. They imported it to Italy and they called it the Grand Duke of Tuscany, but that's like the variety. It's a kind of jasmine that has a particular kind of a flower to it. And a lot of jasmines are clinging or climbing jasmine, but this one's a bush. And it's very, very beautiful scent. So she had this amazing, they smelled this amazing smell coming. So they wanted to see, well, what's the cause of this? So they went and followed it, and they came upon the Yamuna. And on the Yamuna, on the bank, there was a beautiful woman with a boat. And so Shantanu got off his chariot and got in the boat and said, why are you here with the boat? She said, well, my father is the king of the fisher people. So he, in order to get good karma, he asked me to ferry people across the river. So Shantanu said, okay, yeah, no, I need to get across the river. So he said, I need to go over there. So she took him over there. And then he said, no, actually, I need to go further down the river. So she's paddling him. And he says, are you married? And she says, no. He said, I'm King Shantanu of the Bharat dynasty. Would you want to marry me? And she said, I am not my own keeper. She said, ask my father first to get permission. So then he said, well, take me to your father. So they went to the father, and the father, who was this king of fishers, he said, I have a very beautiful daughter, and I understand that you're, the king of the Kurus and everything, but my daughter is very special, and I don't want, my lineage to play second fiddle. I know you have a son. So the thing is that anyone who is my daughter's children, I want them to become kings. So Shantanu, he couldn't agree to that because his love for Devavrata was too much. So he just left. But Devavrata, upon hearing that and then seeing his father's condition of sadness, he didn't want his dad to be sad. So he went to the king of the fisher people. He said, what do I need to do to make it so that your daughter marries my father? So the fisher guy said, well, you have to agree to never become king. And Bhisma said, fine then, I'll never become king. And then the fisher guy was like, I've heard enough political intrigue and all this Machiavellian stuff that goes on in courts and such, that sure, you can say, I don't want to be king, but your kids, if you have any kids, they're going to say, well, what about us? And create a whole, civil war. So Bhisma said, fine. I take a vow that I shall never have children. So with that, had to being so selfless and taking these vows, it was a lot of it was a selflessness, plus the difficulty and many other things. He took this vow. So flowers rained down from the sky, and the gods declared his name shall be Bhisma. It means terrible vow. It comes from the word Bhima, which means terrific, as in terrifying. That's what Bhima's name actually means. It means terrifying. So Bhishma means terrible vow, and Bhima means terrifying. And Abhaya means fearless. So ba. That's where we get the fear word from. So that's how Bhisma got his name. So Satyavati was the fisherman's daughter, and Bhisma brought her back to Shantanu and explained the situation. And Shantanu at first was like, but he's like so grateful for what Bhisma had done. So Satyavati had 2 sons with Shantanu. One was named Chitrangada, and he was the eldest. And the other one was named Vichitravirya. So the thing is, Chitran, eventually, after a certain amount of time, Shantanu got old and passed away. So Chitrangada was made the king. So now Chitrangada was very powerful. And he was a great warrior. And his name and fame as a warrior soon spread around, to the point that even in the heavenly realms, the Apsaras used to talk about Chitrangada. Now, unfortunately for Chitrangada, there's another Chitrangada who's a Gandharva. And let's just say he couldn't tolerate the fact that there was a human king being praised by Apsaras in the heavenly realms who had the same name as him. And this Chitrangada is a very powerful person. He's what's called a Parama Upadeva. It means, Upadeva means nearly a god. It's a class of being, which is like Gandharvas, Kinnaras, Kimpurushas, all these other beings, like centaurs and fairies and trolls and all this stuff that we have. That's all real. And they all exist in another dimension. And those are what we call Upadevas. And then there's what's called Devas, which are like the gods, So the thing is that Chitrangada is a different kind of class. It's called Parama Upadeva. It means the greatest amongst all those Upadevas. And there's 7 of them, and they're Gandharva kings. Now the Gandharvas all have wings, like angels. And the color of their wings lets you know how powerful they are. It's kind of like a ranking system or class system. This is described by one Madhvacharya's disciples. This is how we get this knowledge of these things. He has a book where he talks about all these kinds of details. So all the Parama Upadevas, they have wings that glow like the sunlight. And Chitrangada is one of the most powerful of those. He's almost on the level of a god. There's probably certain gods that he's more powerful than. And so he has a bit of a personality. Him and Indra really like each other. They really get along. And whenever Indra kind of needs someone to do something, kind of handle the situation, he sends Chitrangada to do it. That's how powerful Chitrangada is. So I'll give you an example of the personality and power of Chitrangada. This is from Ramayana. When Ravana came to Swarga to invade it with all the demons, not only did he have the Rakshasas, he had the Asuras with him too. So the whole massive evil army was there. And there's the big walls of Swarga, they have these giant rainbow walls there that are like miles and miles tall. And they have these giant gates and all this. And this, like the assembly hall of Indra is like 50 miles wide, 20 miles high, just to give you an idea. And there's all these other Upadevas and gods, and they have their residences in this massive city. So there's this giant gate. And Ravana came up to it, with this big sword called Kala, something. Maybe he's Kala name. He means death sword. So he banging on the door with his sword. And nobody really wants to answer it, but Chitrangada comes forward. Now Chitrangada, he has he's a very stylish guy. And he wasn't even dressed for battle. He just had a cane, like a walking stick, carved from a crystal that glowed like a rainbow. And he came to the door and opened it like a crack and said, "What do you want?" And Ravana said, "I am the Lord of Lanka and the most fierce. I'm the one who makes the world scream in terror. I am the greatest demon, and I have a demon armies, and we have come and demand surrender," and giving this whole talk. And Chitrangada stops him and he says, "Do you know who I am?" So Ravana says, "Huh?" He says, "My name is Chitrangada. I am the Lord of Music. I'm not the messenger boy for some 10-headed cockroach." So Ravana gets very angry because, Rakshasas are kind of ugly. And although Ravana wasn't, but Gandharvas make fun of Rakshasas like that. So Ravana raises his sword and Chitrangada uses his cane. He knocks it out of his hand. And he slammed the door in his face. Because he just wanted to, annoy Ravana or spit in his face, so to speak. Like, don't mess with me. He wanted to be the guy that kind of, showed up. This is Chitrangada's nature. So when he heard that there was some little human king with the same name as him, that was too much. He came down to the earth. He flew down with his blazing golden wings, blew on a conch shell and shook the whole walls of Hastinapur, pulled out his sword, which, because Gandharvas have these swords that glow, they put their internal Shakti into the sword and it becomes like, glows like fire. And so Chitrangada came out, the human one, and said, I challenge you to fight. There's not enough room in this universe for two people named Chitrangada. So then they went to Kurukshetra and they started fighting. And the human Chitrangada, it must be said, for 1 whole year, they fought every day. 1 year. So it took the Gandharva king, Chitrangada, who was so powerful. It took him 365 days of fighting every day to finally defeat the human. But unfortunately, as it was, he did. So they were left with Chitravirya. Now, if Chitrangada was a fighter, but Chitravirya is not a fighter. He was more like a lover than a fighter, if you get me. And Bhisma was very concerned. He wanted to make sure that Chitrangada, Vichitravirya was married, but there's a big problem because they had Swayamvaras back in those days. And as it was, Bhisma was worried that if Vichitravirya goes to a Swayamvara, he ain't going to come back alive. So he heard about, there was this king, the king of Kashi. Kashi Raj was his name. He had 3 daughters, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. That's Amba, little Amba, and the littlest Amba. That's how you translate that. So there's Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. So Bhisma thought to himself, well, three girls is good enough. So he's like, Bhisma went to, so they had the assembly, there's the kings are sitting there and there's, assembled chairs and there's the 3 princesses kind of sitting on a dais with the king. And it's kind of like a Coliseum. It's like a place where everyone gathers. It's outside, and everyone's kind of sitting there. They have to engage in the games, and then Bhisma rides up in the middle of it on his chariot and stops at a distance, and everyone's kind of surprised because they're like, well, Bhisma took a vow never to marry. What's he doing here? And Bhisma puts his hands in the air. There's some murmuring, and then he starts talking about Dharma. So they're thinking, Bhisma just showed up because he wants to give us some lecture or something. So Bhisma starts talking about Dharma and the importance of Dharma, and he says, my little brother, I need to protect him. And the highest Dharma is to protect your family. So my little brother requires these 3 queens Anyone has an objection, then fight me. So all the kings become angry, and they start putting on their helmets and picking up weapons. And Bhisma just stands there on the back of his chariot while they're doing this. And when everyone's fully armed, he takes up his bow and knocks all of their helmets off and makes a big pile of helmets on the stage. Because he could have took their heads, but he just knocked their helmets off to show them that I'm not, what he could do. So Bhisma, all the kings, after seeing the feat of Bhisma, they sit down. So Bhisma rides up to the stage, and the three princesses, they come in the back. And Bhisma, he rides away. So there's one king there. He challenges, he gives chase. That king is Shalva. That's the same Shalva that fights Krishna later. So Shalva, he's chasing Bhisma, and Bhisma fights him and eventually destroys his bow and weapons and chariot and everything. So Bhisma rides forth to Shalva and knocks him with the bow and says, "Little boys like you shouldn't fight men like me," and then rides off. And so Bhisma, he goes back with the three girls. But Amba, when they get back to Hastinapur, Amba speaks up. She's the eldest. And she explains to Bhisma that she had already chosen Shalva. And they had already agreed to it. And that's why Shalva kept on fighting. So Bhisma is quite disturbed because he didn't really, he didn't want to get in the way of, because Swayambara means woman's choice. So she already chose somebody. He said, go to Shalva then. So Amba, she goes, and goes back to Shalva. But Shalva is too egotistical. He didn't like that Bhisma totally beat him up. So he's like, "I'm not going to take you back. Otherwise, it's like table scraps. I don't feel like taking you now." So Amba was really sad. So then she went back to Hastinapur, and they said, "Well, you already chose Shalva, so you can't have Vichitravirya." She said, "Well, Shalva won't take me." He said, "That's not, we can't, it doesn't work that way. You can't marry somebody that you don't choose." So it was a big problem. And she can't just go home either. So she was just sitting there crying. So these sages managed to come and see them. And they said, "Don't worry, we know Parshuram. He is the guru of Bhisma. He'll set everything straight." So they took Amba to Parshuram, and she kind of explained the situation. And at first he felt compassion for her, but he didn't really act on it. But eventually, there was enough coaxing from the other Brahmins that Parshuram said, "Okay, well, I'll go talk to Bhisma." So he took Amba with him. And Parshuram came to Hastinapur. So Parshuram is very powerful. even before he was empowered by Krishna and Rama took it back, he was very powerful. But Parshuram is one of these Chiranjiva or Sanjeev. He lives forever. I did the calculations, and I believe he appeared like at least 27 kalpas ago or something like that. So he lives for long time. So he's a very powerful personality. And his guru was Shiva, who taught him Om Gopijana Balabhaya Swaha. That was his Kavacha mantra that he received from Shiva directly, Sadashiva in Maha Kailash. And then he chanted that mantra, and then Agastya appeared and gave him another mantra to Krishna, 108 names of Krishna, because his adhikar wasn't high enough. So he chanted this mantra to Krishna and raised his adhikar, and then Krishna appeared and blessed him and gave him all his Shakti. So anyway, that's in the Brahmanda Purana. It's a very extended story of Parshuram. I actually wrote that as a book. It's called The Slayer of Tyrants. So Parshuram appeared and he came and he said, "You've wronged Amba. So we have to solve this situation." He said, you should marry Amba because she can't marry anybody now. So, Bhisma was in the middle, washing Parshuram's feet when Parshuram said that. And then Bhisma stopped and he stood up and he said, "Look, Gurudev, I'm sorry, but I took a vow and I cannot undo that vow." But Parshuram said, "Look, no matter your own, arrogance about your vow, you caused the situation here and it needs to be solved." And Bhisma said, "No, you don't understand. I took a vow and I always uphold my vow, not from fear of threat or any other reason. Nothing can make me break my vow." And Parshuram said, "You know who you're talking to?" He said, "I slayed 27 generations of Kshatriyas in other yugas that were much great warriors." Bhisma said, "You only burnt dry grass. There was no Bhisma around then. There was no warrior born that was like Bhisma before, and there will be no warrior like Bhisma in the future. I am the greatest warrior. And you cannot force me to marry or break my vow." So Parshuram become very angry. So then they went to the battle to Kurukshetra to settle the issue. So Bhisma came on his chariot, and Parshuram came and summoned the chariot out of thin air. And then they fought, and it was such a vicious battle, and they fought for several days. Eventually it came to a point that Parshuram knocked out Bhisma. And while he was knocked out, the Vasus came to him and said, "We have a celestial weapon that Parshuram doesn't know about. And it's from your time as leader of the Vasu. So we give you this weapon. So then Bhisma came forward and withdrew the weapon and put it on his bow. And Parshuram was startled. That's something to say. If you read what battles, it must have been something else what Bhisma produced. So he aimed it at Parshuram, and Parshuram was shocked because he couldn't counter the weapon. So Bhisma didn't want to hurt Parshuram or make him feel bad because he was his guru after all. He just said, look, I ain't gonna break my vow. You can't force me. So Parshuram said, okay. And then they actually kind of made up and embraced, and Parshuram left, and Bhisma went back to his own place. And Amba was just left there, and she was really angry. So she started doing tapasya. And she started doing tantric ritual for Shiva so that he would appear and give her powers. So he's doing the mantras, she did all these mantras. And finally, Shiva came and said, what is it that you want? She said, I want to kill Bhisma. So Shiva said, fine then. You shall be born as the son of Drupada. You shall be born as the daughter of Drupada, and then you'll become his son, and then you will kill Bhisma. So that was the benediction that she got. So that's I think where we're going to end it. So that's the story of Shantanu and Ganga, and how Devavrata was born, and how Devavrata became Bhisma, and how Bhisma got the daughters Ambika and Ambalika to marry Vichitravirya, and how he fought Parshuram. So that's that little part of Mahabharata. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, is there time to ask a few questions?
Yeah. If you have any questions, please ask.
When you say Amba was doing tantric rituals to Shiva, does it mean that she did some kind of black magic?
No, that's a very big confusion amongst devotees. Tantra doesn't mean black magic. That's what Jwalamukhi says. She's not a guru of anything.
Okay.
Tantra just simply means a practice.
Okay.
It's a practice. Even it says in Bhagavatam that if you look at Bhagavatam, it says the different incarnations of Krishna. One of the things that Narada brought was a tantra. It says it right there in Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto.
Mm.
So tantra just is a practice that you do to get a goal.
Okay. Yeah, can be for good or bad.
Yeah. It's just a way you worship a deity to get something.
Okay.
It's not like karma kanda. Like I can worship Indra to get money. That's what we call karma kanda. But if I was to worship in a tantric way, you would have to follow a particular kind of vows, like no eating this, and you have to chant this many mantras every day and follow this particular practice. This was called.
Could you say the Pancharatrika that?
Yes, the Pancharatrika is a tantra.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the difference. So that's the problem. It's like demons like to make good things sound bad. So we hear tantric and we're like, ooh, scary black magic. No, there's some crazy people that do austerities that seem a little weird, and but then there's other people that are just crazy and eat brains and do crazy stuff, and that's something else.
Okay, thank you. Another question: when there's a showering of flowers from the heavens, and the Gandharvas or other beings, they are, you mentioned they are invisible to us. Yeah, they have ghostly bodies. And is the showering of the flowers also invisible for our eyes?
No, but not particularly. But they say if you see a rainbow and it's sunny and it rains still, even though it's sunny outside, they say that is the same as the God showering flowers.
Ah, so that's okay. Same category.
Yeah, even though we don't see the flowers, the rain falling is what they say it is. So if it's sunny outside and you see a rainbow in the distance, and then you feel rain, then they say that that's the same as the God showering flowers.
Well, so it's more metaphorically then, yeah.
Oh. Yeah, well, maybe they are showering flowers. We can't see it.
Yeah, and
we feel the rain.
Never how it was, but yeah. So that's explaining how it's so auspicious. Then in which book did Madhvacharya speak about like those details about devas?
Oh no, there was one of his disciples is named Jagannath Dasaru, and he wrote a book about those details.
I think it would be very valuable if you share some of like those sources or other kind of background details, and then you just hand it out to the people that attend or so. Then much higher attendance rate, or you can also give it to people for a low amount of money, and then so something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Or I could just, I should just compile it and give it out to devotees.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff is very, is very, Madhvas are very, they're very occult, I mean, they don't share everything, but sometimes they share things with me. So then that's how I know.
Yeah.
They're very much like that. Very secretive. They're very powerful, It's not like they do yajna very different than Ramanujas and devotees even. Most devotees, because the person that wrote down the yajna practice for Gaudiya was a Ramanuja. So the way that devotees do it is the way that Ramanujas do it. And it's very, everyone gets around in a group and they follow a particular way. But the Madhvas, they have a very different way of doing stuff, very occult, And but it's very important, because we're from their lineage, so it's important to learn, from them. They have very powerful mantra practice.
Yeah, thanks for that insight.
Yeah, right. A lot of they actually fight a lot with black magicians.
Yeah, it's good to know. There are some that
they have they're like there's such a thing as black magicians, but I wouldn't necessarily call them tantrics, even though they kind of are, because I just know too much about stuff to say things like that.
Yeah, it's
I know because I mean, like that's a very common way of looking at it, and that's okay, I guess, to say that. But I know that there's a lot of legitimate Shaivas that just do tantric practices, and that's not even evil. It's just, there's a good percentage of Shaivas that are actually not Mayavadis at all. And some of them come from very long lineages that are very like bona fide, But
Very-
most people just throw them all into a bad category, and then we make offenses as a result. Like I've met Shaivas, and they'll tell me straight up, Shankaracharya was evil. And he ruined everything. And there's Shaivas who are Dvaitavads like Madhva. There's Shaivas who are like Achinta, Beta, everything. Even the concept of the different rasas, the 5 different rasas, that's actually from Kashmiri Shaivism.
Yeah, very, very deep stuff.
It's very,
I would like to
the more you know, the more knowledge you have, and then the more you understand that Krishna is very powerful and all embodied. But there's a lot of devotees out there of different kinds,
Yeah, it's not just stereotype, black and white, a lot of gray shade.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Prabhu, for sharing. I would love to continue. At the same time, I'm now.
It's already been like an hour or something. But yeah, we'll talk about this more later.
Yeah, and see you tomorrow.
Okay. Yes. Well, yeah. Yes. Okay. Haribol.
Haribol.